Ryan Boulais, you're joining us as CISO from the AES Corporation, one of the world's leading power companies, headquartered in the US, but generating and distributing electric power in 15 countries globally. You come with a deep background that includes service at Thomson Reuters, GE, Northrop Grumman, and the US military. Leveraging those multiple lenses, what do you see as the key drivers in our current cybersecurity challenge?
You know, a big part of that is understanding where your business is, where they're heading, but it's also through the lens of the threat actors and what are they interested in. And so, you know, defending against the nation state actor versus defending against a cyber criminal might be a little bit different in terms of their intent, their abilities to get into your environment, their desire. You know, nation states are very persistent, right? That's why we call them APT, and they'll find ways to get in. You know, cybercrime largely, you know, look at ransomware, it's very large right now. Targets of opportunity, right? And so threat actors have to be right once, you know, we have to be correct all the time in order to kind of win the game here, so to speak. So, you know, from my point of view, understanding, you know, which threat actors radar you're going to be on, you know, and pushing forward with a program that kind of aligns that with your business is really key.
In addition to the external threat vector, I know you also look to focus on the context of the organization, including its sector, the maturity of the organization's cybersecurity program, et cetera.
There are various components that I'd say would fit into an analysis that you'd have to do for each individual company. There might be some regulatory requirements from a cybersecurity perspective that need to be met, some compliance requirements, you know, and then overall security. What are your customers, you know, demanding of you or asking of you to do? And then what should you just do as kind of the overall general defense? And so, you know, I look at it as probably some layers here that we need to unpack. There's table stakes, like things that you just should have in place, like a cybersecurity program to start with. Many companies still do not have cybersecurity programs. You know, then look at, you know, beyond that, what are the basic controls you have? And then what are the requirements? What are your compliance requirements, your regulatory requirements, and things of that nature? All of that, you know, based on industry, based on company, based on the type of data that you have will matter in terms of shaping what a program looks like. And then, you know, what investments are going to be needed in order to really achieve a level of security that's necessary to protect the company.
Okay, Ryan, given a focused analysis of a firm's context and cybersecurity needs, can you lay out high-level strategies for organizations, especially in the critical infrastructure sphere?
It starts at the top, and education with the board and, you know, board of directors and CEOs and executive leadership teams in various companies. Part of a CISO's role really should be to serve as that educator, you know, in those areas and understanding and pushing forward the why it's important from a business perspective, why it's important from a brand perspective, why it's important just in general, you know, across the board to make sure we have continuity of operations, you know, for our company and for our customers. And so I think that's step one. Is it starts with education and then making sure you've got the right business cases and funding in place to really drive a program throughout. You know, I'd say the second thing is you know, alignment with the government, particularly when it comes to critical infrastructure. And, you know, there are quite a few, you know, challenges here, things that are moving well. I mean, information sharing certainly over the past 10 years or so has taken off really well. It's been a big focus, you know, from the government perspective. But there's also this element of having to understand, I'll come back to that threat actor piece a little bit. There are very few companies who are in a position to truly defend against nation state actors. I mean, it is a very expensive proposition. If you look at, you know, SolarWinds or something that happened recently there, trying to uncover that from a company level point of view, is extremely difficult. I mean, any one company to do it on their own. You know, I look at, you know, cybercrime as more along those table stakes, right? If you're a target of opportunity, so to speak, rather than a specific targeted, you know, element there, you should have those baseline controls, you know, in place to help. With that, though, comes help from the government, because I think if you look at cybercrime as a team sport, If we're really, really looking to tackle that true nation state problem, either from an espionage perspective or a cyber warfare perspective, that's going to take a village. It's going to take more than just one company, in the critical infrastructure area to do their part here.
You mentioned the importance of government assistance, especially in the critical infrastructure arena. Where can public-private collaboration be improved?
I think one of the challenges is, going forward is in that public-private sector partnership is understanding who's on point, right? Is it the FBI? Is it DHS? Is it DOD? Is it DOE? Depending on the sector you're in. All of those questions, from a company perspective, make it a little bit challenging to figure out, from whether it's from an intel sharing point of view, whether it's from an incident response point of view. That I think sort of that consolidation a little bit around having a government entity, be that direct point of contact for certain functions, I think would go a long way. And a challenge that we have to collectively solve together.
Functionally, what would you like to see in terms of support from the government?
Having that alignment there around partnerships on, from an intelligence, not just an intelligence sharing, but also in a detection perspective. I would love to see more. I mean, the U.S. government has access to lots of information that, we might have missed somewhere along the way. Having that come out faster and having that type of interaction faster would be good. Incident response, depending on how that unfolds, gets a little bit tricky from a legal perspective in terms of what to disclose or not to disclose, when to disclose it. There are lots of components there that we would have to work through together from a legal point of view. And so I think there's a lot of work to do there in order to bring the public sector and private sector closer together. But I do think it's necessary because, again, cybersecurity is a team sport.
What type of company-to-company collaboration do you think is most valuable?
I still see it as more of a personal relationship. I guess my old intelligence roots come out here, where if you have the right connections in the right place, you'll end up with kind of insights that you might not get otherwise. And that's an important element. I think it's a very difficult piece to kind of break through and make it, consistent, across an entire supply chain of companies. A lot of, based on the fact that many companies are not in the same, I'll say, maturity level for understanding cybersecurity threats. And so I think today we're still largely relationship based rather than technology based in terms of intercompany sharing.
You referenced supply chain, and staying within the private sector context for a moment, what strategy do you think corporations should entertain in that regard?
Wow, that's a difficult one. I'm not sure anyone really has this one solved yet. I mean, if you look at the number of suppliers, vendors, partners that an individual company does business with on a global scale or US scale, whatever it might be, that number is probably in the thousands. And understanding what each respective company's risk profile looks like from a cybersecurity point of view is really impractical. I mean, just if I were to go in and say I want to assess not just the company I'm doing business with, but who are their suppliers on top of that could potentially impact, my project. That's a very daunting task. And so, for what we've done at AES is we've looked at a crown jewel approach and what types of data or systems are out there that if they were to, be altered, lost, stolen, otherwise become unavailable, create a very bad day, just across the board for us, and look at having more in-depth conversations with the companies that are impacting our crown jewels rather than trying to do it holistically across the board. That's one model. I know in the financial industry, they've largely, or a lot of them have consolidated on some sort of exchange type of model. There are companies that have been formed out there that do this, where you have an assessment done once and you put it into an exchange and you can pay a small amount of money and divvy it out to whomever is asking. I think you have to be careful there just with a the difference between, I'll say, compliance and answering questions and security versus how exactly are you going to handle, my sensitive data. So I think, the exchange model is probably a good one for kind of the basic foundational components. But at the end of the day, if a company or an outside company is going to be touching my crown jewels in one way or another, I do think it's worth a conversation with them around what controls are going to be in place and how do we prove that, how do we have the governance around it and make sure that it's solid.
So perhaps a common assessment could be a starting point, a foundation, but to your point, you undertake a deeper dive if the supplier is a critical one.
I would advocate for that.
All these efforts require financial resources, time, effort, and so forth. Any insights you have relative to justifying the necessary investments?
That's also a great question, and that comes down to the effectiveness in being able to communicate the value or the business value of a cybersecurity program. I think if you approach it, the multifaceted approach, right, in terms of who you're talking to, and know your audience. Your CFO, your CEO, your chief legal counsel, all are going to have different perspectives on how they view risk, how they view cybersecurity, and understanding those components, understanding where their challenges are and how cybersecurity fits into that, I think is really key to getting the funding.
Are there any core misperceptions, lack of understandings in the cybersecurity realm that you'd like to address?
I think the accountability model and the responsibility model is one that I think we work hard on in general to address. And I don't know if it's more of a misconception or misalignment, but when you think about business risk, it's really, from a financial perspective, if you're running platforms, there's uptime risks, there's things of that nature. And then you've got cyber risk. And because you have a CISO, we kind of put that on the side, so to speak, in many cases, and say, well, it's the security teams that is accountable, for security. And really, it's got to be the entire company. Everyone has to be in on the risks that are aligned with their particular program, project, implementation, whatever it might be. Cybersecurity is a risk, just like financial risk, just like project timeline risk, just like all of the other components that come along with it, right? And so, having the right accountability model in place so that you've got an entire company moving in the same direction about cybersecurity, the same way they're moving in the same direction around, the financials and other components that make a company go, I think is really important.
Ryan, if you had to sum up the key takeaways for senior executives, what would they be?
I'd start with, again, it comes back to assessing your company's business strategy, where they are, where they're heading, understanding the threats that you're going to face as a result of that, understanding the current state of your cybersecurity program, and the gaps that you might have that enable the business to where they're heading as a result of this. Putting a program in place through conversations with your executive leadership team, your CEO, your board, other decision makers, so to speak, and along the way. That education component is really important. Measuring security is also key. Like I said, compliance and maturity models have their place, but I would caution against using those as strictly a proxy for measuring security in your company. And then, finally, the partnerships are really key for defense. Cybersecurity is a team sport. I keep hammering that home. Interact with, the government agencies and participate there. Participate in, in peer forums and, information sharing forums. All of those are very helpful. You never know where a piece of information is going to come from, whether it be, tactically on, from an intelligence and indicator, a compromise perspective, or strategically on how to define and implement a program, that is purpose fit for your company.